Is the world on the edge of a new economic Cold War? And could Donald Trump be the one pulling the trigger in a stunning move that's already sending shockwaves through global markets? Former US President Donald Trump has officially declared what he's calling Liberation Day. But behind the patriotic branding lies a far more explosive reality: the potential ignition of the largest trade war the world has ever seen. With tariffs reaching historic highs and nationalist rhetoric making a fierce comeback, this isn't just about economics. It's about power, control, and the future direction of the global order. Trump's fiery speech framed the announcement as a bold reclaiming of American sovereignty, a defiant stand against what he calls economic terrorism from foreign nations, especially China. He accused global powers of manipulating trade, flooding US markets with cheap goods, and undermining American workers. But this isn't just election year noise. This is strategy, a full-scale economic offensive designed to rally the base, reshape trade alliances, and test the limits of international diplomacy. The phrase Liberation Day may sound like a rally cry, but to economists, investors, and geopolitical analysts, it's ringing alarm bells. What does liberation mean in a world built on interdependence? In a time when supply chains stretch across continents and no economy stands truly alone, what happens when the United States, one of the central pillars of the global trading system, starts throwing punches this hard? The new tariff threats aren't minor tweaks. We're talking about up to 60% tariffs on Chinese imports, sweeping measures against Mexico, and growing signals that even allies aren't safe from this next wave of economic warfare. It's a massive escalation. And unlike previous trade spats, this one comes at a moment of deep vulnerability. Inflation fears are rising, interest rates are unstable, and markets are already on edge from ongoing geopolitical tensions. To some, Trump's Liberation Day speech is a patriotic masterstroke. To others, it's economic sabotage. But no matter where you stand politically, one thing is clear: this is no longer business as usual. This is about setting the tone for a radically different global economy, one defined by protectionism, political strong-arming, and the unraveling of decades of international trade agreements. Global reaction was instant and volatile. Beijing didn't hold back, with Chinese officials vowing to retaliate with equal force. The European Union, already weary of transatlantic tensions, called for urgent trade talks. Meanwhile, markets responded with brutal clarity. Sharp drops in the tech sector, plummeting investor confidence, and rising anxiety among multinational corporations scrambling to assess the fallout. And here's the twist: this may just be the beginning. Because beneath the tariffs and speeches lies a deeper agenda, one that goes far beyond the ballot box. Trump isn't just campaigning. He's laying out an entirely new economic doctrine, aggressive, inward-facing, and unapologetically combative. It's not just about bringing jobs back. It's about redrawing the global map, economically, politically, and strategically. And the real question isn't just what will happen next. It's whether the rest of the world is ready for this kind of confrontation, or if we're all headed toward an era of unprecedented economic conflict that will reshape everything we thought we knew about globalization. The Liberation Day Declaration. What did Trump really say? When Donald Trump took to the stage and boldly declared Liberation Day, the world didn't just hear another campaign catchphrase, it heard a battle cry. The timing, the language, the symbolism, all of it was deliberate. In just a few minutes, Trump reframed the national economic conversation, transforming it from one of global cooperation to one of patriotic resistance. But what exactly did he say? And why is it already being called one of the most disruptive economic speeches of the decade? From the moment he opened his mouth, it was clear this wasn't going to be a standard political address. Trump's tone was defiant, charged with emotion, and carefully crafted to stir both outrage and pride. He called out countries by name, most notably China and Mexico, accusing them of orchestrating what he described as an economic invasion of American soil. With the American flag waving behind him and a crowd roaring in approval, he declared that the era of American appeasement was over. According to him, this so-called Liberation Day would mark the beginning of a new economic age, one where the United States reclaims its sovereignty, not just politically, but financially. He painted a picture of an America that had been exploited, weakened, and underestimated for too long. In Trump's words, globalization wasn't a triumph, it was a trap. He spoke of abandoned factories, families destroyed by outsourcing, and a nation whose strength had been drained by decades of unfair trade deals. But his rhetoric didn't stop at victimhood. It was also full of fire, of reclaiming power, punishing abusers, and rewriting the rules of the global economy. And central to that message was a single sweeping action: tariffs. He announced that his administration, if re-elected, would impose up to 60% tariffs on Chinese goods, arguing that this was not only justified, but necessary. He claimed these tariffs would force foreign companies to bring manufacturing back to US soil and stop what he called economic sabotage from abroad. Mexico, too, was in the crosshairs. He accused them of facilitating not just illegal immigration, but also undercutting American industries through low-wage manufacturing and lax regulations. But what truly set this speech apart was not just its content, but its delivery. Trump spoke not like a policymaker, but like a wartime leader. He used phrases like economic surrender, foreign occupation, and battle for the soul of our nation. To many watching, especially outside the US, it sounded less like an economic policy and more like the declaration of a new kind of war, a trade war that wouldn't just involve tariffs and retaliations, but ideological divides, political rifts, and a rewriting of the global economic order. The reactions were instant and polarized. Supporters saw a bold vision of a renewed America, strong, independent, and finally standing up to its rivals. Critics saw a dangerous escalation, one that could isolate the US and drag the global economy into chaos. But love him or hate him, Trump once again succeeded in doing what he does best, shifting the spotlight, commanding the narrative, and forcing everyone, from Wall Street to world leaders, to react. What Trump really said on that stage wasn't just a policy position, it was a warning, a promise, and a provocation all in one. Whether the world is ready or not, Liberation Day has begun, and it may change everything. Now I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Trump's declaration is a move of strength or a recipe for economic disaster? Drop your answer in the comments or just write the phrase liberation or isolation, and let's see where everyone stands. The new tariff package. Who's getting hit first? As the dust settled from Trump's Liberation Day declaration, the world turned its eyes toward the numbers, and what they saw was a trade offensive of unprecedented scale. The new tariff package isn't just symbolic, it's tactical, and it targets America's largest trading partners with surgical precision. The core of the plan: a sweeping 60% tariff on Chinese imports, followed by escalating duties on goods from Mexico, and the looming threat of tariffs on other countries, including longtime allies, if they don't play fair, as Trump put it. But behind the bravado lies a far more complex and strategic maneuver, a blueprint to force the world to negotiate on Trump's terms. The Chinese economy is the first and most significant target. These tariffs aim directly at sectors that have been fueling China's growth for the last 2 decades: electronics, steel, textiles, and automotive parts. This isn't a minor policy adjustment. It's a potential gut punch to a supply chain that's become deeply embedded in every corner of the global market. From smartphones to medical equipment, thousands of products could see price surges. American companies that rely on these goods, from Silicon Valley to small-town manufacturers, now face a brutal dilemma: absorb the cost, pass it to consumers, or relocate entire supply chains overnight. Mexico, often viewed as the quiet middleman in US trade politics, has now been dragged into the spotlight. Trump accused Mexico of enabling what he called a twin threat, economic and security related. On one hand, he pointed to the relocation of American jobs south of the border. On the other, he tied it to immigration concerns, arguing that a flood of cheap goods and illegal labor was eroding American stability from within. The result: new tariffs on auto parts, agricultural goods, and even raw materials like aluminum and cement, all aimed at forcing renegotiation of trade frameworks once thought settled. What makes this different from past trade disputes is the scale and speed. Trump isn't leaving room for diplomacy. These tariffs are designed to hurt quickly, and the messaging is clear: comply with America's new trade vision or pay the price. It's a strategy that mixes economic muscle with political intimidation, but it's also a gamble. The ripple effects are already being felt. Retailers are warning of rising prices, automakers are preparing to cut production, and some corporations are even freezing expansion plans. Foreign governments are preparing retaliatory measures, and there are whispers of WTO challenges that could drag this conflict into a global legal arena. But for Trump and his supporters, this is exactly the point. To them, these moves aren't destructive, they're corrective. They argue that for decades, America has allowed itself to be weakened by one-sided trade deals, and that only by hitting back hard can the country reset the balance. Still, there's a question hanging in the air. Who's really getting hit first? The foreign producers, the American consumer, or the very economy Trump claims he's trying to defend? Global response, allies or enemies? While the US roars forward with its new tariff regime, the rest of the world is scrambling to respond. The shockwaves from Liberation Day weren't just economic, they were deeply political. Countries that once saw the United States as a dependable partner are now questioning their alliances. Others are bracing for economic impact, and some, like China, are preparing to strike back. The first response came from Beijing, swift and unforgiving. Chinese officials condemned the 60% tariffs as an act of economic aggression and vowed to respond with necessary countermeasures. Though they didn't immediately disclose specifics, insiders suggest that China is preparing to hit back in sectors where the US is particularly vulnerable: agriculture, aviation, and tech. But beyond tariffs, China is also exploring regulatory warfare, increasing red tape for American firms operating in its territory, delaying licenses, and tightening inspections. The message is clear: two can play this game. Meanwhile, the European Union, already fractured by internal disagreements and weary from years of strained relations with Washington, finds itself in an awkward position. Countries like Germany and France have voiced concern, fearing a domino effect on their exports and markets. Brussels issued a carefully worded but stern statement calling for restraint and dialogue. But behind closed doors, EU leaders are discussing contingency plans. If Trump extends tariffs to European industries, particularly autos and machinery, a new trade war front could open overnight. Even traditional allies like Canada, Japan, and South Korea aren't immune. While their names weren't central in Trump's speech, the tone suggested no one is truly safe. Canadian officials warned of a deterioration in trust, and Japan expressed deep concern over rising protectionism. It's not just about money, it's about the rewriting of decades-old diplomatic understandings. The idea of shared prosperity is being replaced with transactional nationalism. The World Trade Organization is watching nervously. These types of aggressive moves, if challenged and ruled illegal, could further undermine an already fragile global institution. And that may be exactly what Trump wants. Throughout his political career, he has criticized the WTO as outdated and biased against American interests. A full-blown challenge may provide the perfect opportunity to distance the US from global trade arbitration entirely. What's even more striking is the silence, or perhaps caution, from multinational corporations. While some CEOs have issued public warnings, many are waiting to see how far this goes. They know that speaking out too soon could provoke political backlash. But behind the scenes, lobbying efforts are intensifying, and trade groups are preparing legal challenges. In this high-stakes chess match, alliances are being redrawn in real time. Some countries may choose to align more closely with China or Europe as a hedge against US unpredictability. Others might bend under pressure and accept new terms from Washington to avoid deeper economic pain. What we're witnessing isn't just a trade war. It's the unraveling of a global system built on trust, compromise, and shared growth. And as that system frays, one question becomes impossible to ignore. Is the US building a stronger position for itself, or simply standing alone on a battlefield it created? Shockwaves through the markets. Within hours of Trump's Liberation Day speech, the tremors began to ripple through global financial markets like an approaching storm. Traders, economists, and CEOs knew what was coming, but even then, the speed and severity of the market response took many by surprise. In real time, we saw an economic ecosystem react with panic, uncertainty, and in some cases, sheer disbelief. This wasn't just a political announcement, it was a declaration that shook the very foundation of global commerce. The Dow Jones opened to a steep drop, bleeding hundreds of points within minutes. Tech giants, many of them heavily dependent on Chinese manufacturing and global distribution networks, saw their stocks plunge. Semiconductor companies in particular were hit hard, with some losing nearly 8% in a single day. Wall Street had braced for rhetoric, but it wasn't prepared for real action. And that's exactly what Trump delivered. Over in Europe, the Frankfurt and Paris stock exchanges followed suit. Germany's DAX index, already fragile from sluggish industrial output, took a sharp dip, while the euro weakened against the dollar as investors fled to perceived safety. In Asia, the fallout was immediate. Shanghai's composite index tumbled, dragging down neighboring markets like Tokyo and Seoul. The fear wasn't just about tariffs, it was about the unpredictability now baked into the global system. Investors weren't just pricing risk, they were pricing chaos. And it wasn't limited to equities. The bond market lit up with warning signs. The US 10-year Treasury yield dropped sharply, a classic indicator of risk-off sentiment. Meanwhile, commodities like oil and copper dipped as traders began factoring in reduced global demand. The possibility of slowed trade, disrupted supply chains, and retaliatory measures now seemed all too real. Currency markets also began to shift. The Chinese yuan showed signs of pressure, raising speculation that Beijing could be preparing to devalue in response to US tariffs, a move that could further inflame tensions. Meanwhile, emerging market currencies, particularly in Latin America and Southeast Asia, started sliding, caught in the crossfire of a trade war that threatens to destabilize even those on the sidelines. For the average investor, this was a moment of reckoning. Portfolios built on globalization, multinational ETFs, international tech, diversified manufacturing plays were suddenly exposed. For institutional investors, hedge funds, and pension managers, the message was just as clear. The old assumptions no longer apply. Even cryptocurrencies felt the impact. Bitcoin saw a brief surge as some sought refuge in decentralized assets, but even that was tinged with uncertainty. Because when the rules of trade, finance, and diplomacy start shifting this violently, no asset class is truly safe. Still, perhaps the most concerning part wasn't the immediate losses, it was the mood. There was no sense of bottom, no clear path forward. Analysts struggled to predict what would come next because this wasn't economics as usual. It was geopolitics masquerading as policy. The markets weren't just reacting to numbers, they were reacting to fear. And in that fear, something profound was revealed. The global economy is far more fragile than we like to admit. One speech, One man, one ideology, and trillions of dollars began to shift. American business backlash, while the crowd at Trump's Liberation Day rally cheered far from the podium, behind glass boardroom doors and on Wall Street trading floors, the reaction was anything but celebratory. The backlash from American businesses has been swift, sharp, and deeply unsettled. For many of the country's top CEOs and trade associations, Trump's new tariff regime doesn't represent liberation, it represents chaos. Major industries that have relied on global supply chains for decades are now scrambling to understand how deeply these tariffs will cut. Companies that import electronics, machinery, car parts, and raw materials are suddenly facing cost surges that could wreck entire budgets. Small and medium-sized manufacturers, the very businesses Trump claims to protect, are among the most vulnerable. They don't have the financial cushion to absorb 60% tariffs or the logistical agility to switch suppliers overnight. For them, this isn't just a policy shift, it's an existential threat. In the tech sector, alarm bells are ringing loud. Companies like Apple, Dell, and countless startups rely heavily on Chinese-made components. Even a modest hike in tariffs could ripple through product pricing, innovation cycles, and consumer behavior. Industry insiders warn of delayed launches, shrinking profit margins, and a dramatic pullback in research investment. For an economy that has leaned on tech as its growth engine for years, this could be a dangerous slowdown. Retailers are also entering panic mode. From Walmart to mom-and-pop shops, businesses that import goods in bulk are now anticipating major price spikes. If companies pass these costs on to consumers, inflation could rise, undermining recent efforts to stabilize prices. If they try to absorb the hit, layoffs and store closures become a real possibility. In either scenario, it's the everyday American who gets squeezed. Agriculture, too, is preparing for another round of pain. Many farmers still remember the losses from the last trade war with China, when retaliatory tariffs crushed soybean exports and slashed profits across the Midwest. Now, with Trump aiming a new economic strike, there's fear that China will once again target agriculture, this time even more aggressively. For farmers already struggling with climate challenges, supply chain disruptions, and debt, another round of retaliation could push many over the edge. Yet perhaps the most striking response is coming from within Trump's own political base. Business owners and manufacturers who once championed his America First policies. Groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the National Association of Manufacturers have issued rare rebukes, calling the new tariffs reckless and unsustainable. Behind the scenes, lobbyists are flooding Capitol Hill with urgent pleas, pushing for carve-outs, exemptions, or outright reversal of the plan. And what about Wall Street? The markets have responded with volatility. Stocks in industrials, tech, and retail have dipped sharply. Investor confidence is being eroded by the uncertainty of a prolonged trade war. Even whispers of recession have begun to surface again, a fear that's been lingering just beneath the surface for months. Still, Trump remains defiant. He insists that short-term pain will lead to long-term gain, that a tough stance today will bring manufacturing jobs home tomorrow, that American companies must choose patriotism over profit, even if it costs them. But the truth is more complicated. Business doesn't respond to slogans. It responds to math. And right now, the numbers are looking grim. So now the question isn't just what impact these tariffs will have, but whether American industry can survive them, or better yet, whether it's even willing to try. China's counterstrike. A new phase begins. While the United States launched its economic offensive with Trump's Liberation Day, China didn't wait long to signal that it would not back down. The world's second-largest economy, deeply intertwined with American markets, yet fiercely protective of its own sovereignty, has entered the arena not with panic, but with precision. What we are witnessing is not just a trade dispute escalating. It's the opening of a new phase in global power competition, where economics, politics, and national pride collide. Within 48 hours of Trump's announcement, China's Ministry of Commerce released a sharply worded statement denouncing the US tariffs as blatant economic coercion. But rhetoric was just the first move. Behind the scenes, China began orchestrating a series of targeted countermeasures designed to inflict pain exactly where it counts, both symbolically and economically. The first target, American agriculture. Once again, Beijing is preparing to suspend or dramatically reduce purchases of key US commodities like soybeans, corn, and pork, a repeat of its most effective strategy from the 2018 trade war. This is not just about hurting farmers. It's about hitting Trump's political base in red states, leveraging domestic pressure to fracture US resolve, and it works. The last time this tactic was employed, billions in farm subsidies were needed to soften the blow. Now, with food inflation already rising globally, the stakes are even higher. Next comes tech. China has hinted it may restrict access to rare earth minerals, crucial ingredients for semiconductors, electric vehicles, and defense technologies. The irony? Many of the companies that would suffer are the very ones America is trying to protect. Limiting rare earth exports could send shockwaves through the global innovation chain, causing production delays, rising costs, and renewed dependence on unstable sources. But China's response isn't just economic, it's also diplomatic. Beijing is accelerating talks with other major economies to create alternative trade routes and alliances. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCP, for example, gives China a dominant role in the world's largest free trade zone, excluding the US entirely. At the same time, China is deepening ties with Russia, Middle Eastern powers, and even parts of Latin America and Africa, signaling a world that is rapidly realigning, and doing so without Washington. China is also using soft power, leveraging state media to craft a narrative of resilience, dignity, and global cooperation in contrast to what it portrays as American belligerence. Their message is subtle but clear. We don't want a trade war, but we won't be bullied. What makes China's response so dangerous to the US is its patience. Unlike Trump's fast, aggressive style, Beijing plays a longer game. It can afford to absorb short-term losses if it means reshaping the global economic order in its favor over the next decade. In this high-stakes standoff, there are no quick wins, just an escalating cycle of action and reaction, with billions of dollars, millions of jobs, and the balance of global influence on the line. So now the tension rises. Is this the beginning of China's quiet revenge, or just a warning shot before the real retaliation begins? What's at stake? Is this a repeat of the 1930s Smoot-Hawley moment? As this economic conflict intensifies, an eerie historical parallel begins to haunt economists and historians alike: the infamous Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. It started with nationalistic intentions meant to protect American jobs during a crisis. But what followed was catastrophic: global retaliation, collapsing trade, and ultimately a Great Depression that engulfed the world. Could Liberation Day be writing the first chapter of a modern replay? There are disturbing similarities. Then, as now, the world was facing inflation, unemployment fears, and growing distrust in international institutions. Then, as now, leaders believed tariffs would shield their economies, only to find themselves trapped in a retaliatory spiral. And today, Trump's rhetoric mirrors that era's nationalist tone, portraying foreign competition as the enemy and domestic isolation as the solution. But the modern world is more interconnected than ever. A single tariff today can impact dozens of countries through supply chains, logistics hubs, and financial markets. If the US truly moves forward with these protectionist policies, and others respond in kind, we could see a cascading effect across global GDP, trade routes, investment flows, and diplomatic ties. Financial markets are already trembling. Investors fear not just economic disruption, but also the psychological impact of instability. Uncertainty is poison for capital. And with every new speech, every retaliatory measure, that uncertainty grows. Beyond economics, what's truly at stake is the credibility of the global system. For decades, countries operated under the belief that free markets and trade liberalization were key to peace and prosperity. If that belief breaks, if protectionism becomes the new normal, the world could slide into a more fragmented, confrontational, and unstable era. And it's not just about the economy. With economic alliances fracturing, political alliances could follow. Trade has always been tied to diplomacy. If countries begin decoupling economically, military tensions may soon follow. This is why some analysts are warning that the current trade war isn't just an economic event. It's a geopolitical turning point. Some believe this could be an opportunity, a way to reset an unfair system and bring power back to the hands of sovereign nations. Others fear it's a dangerous regression, a step back into a world where might makes right and cooperation becomes impossible. So as history repeats itself, or at least rhymes, we're left with a pressing question. Are we on the brink of economic rebirth or collapse? If you've made it this far, we want to hear from you. How did this video speak to your heart? Was there a moment that challenged your thinking, opened your eyes, or made you reflect in a deeper way? Let us know in the comments by writing, "I liked the content," and feel free to share how this message impacted you personally. Your engagement means more than you know. By subscribing to this channel, you're not just following content, you're becoming part of a mission. A mission to bring clarity, truth, and transformation in a world full of noise and confusion. So don't forget to hit the subscribe button, leave your like to support this important work, and watch the next video already waiting for you on the end screen. It's one you won't want to miss. May God bless your life abundantly, guide your thoughts with wisdom, and fill your path with purpose. We'll see you in the next one.